right. So my name is Jessica Robinson, local history librarian at the Cleveland Heights University Heights Public Library, and I'm interviewing Bill Rubin. The date is December 15th, 2017, and it's about 7:15 p.m., I think.
Sounds good.
Alrighty, so Bill, can you tell me a little bit about yourself and where you were born and your experience growing up?
Sure. I was actually born in Dayton, Ohio, where my dad was a manager for a movie theater. And we came back to Cleveland when I was a year and a half old, and we came to a house on Redwood, Cleveland Heights, that my great-grandparents had built, and that my mother had grown up in, and actually my grandfather had grown up in it, my mother had grown up in it, and then when I was about 3, we moved to University Heights, and the rest of the time growing up I was in University Heights. I went to Case Western Reserve University, both for my undergraduate degree and for my master's degree in library science. Lived in Cleveland Heights for the next, well, up until about 20 years ago, actually. So 20 years ago, I moved all the way down Lee Road to Shaker Heights. Didn't get very far away.
So how long did your family live in Cleveland Heights, and do you know roughly when they came here? Was that if they built the house then?
Yeah, right. It seems to me that they were here in the early 20s.
Wow.
Well, actually, I take that back, because I think my grandfather's draft card was for Redwood. So 1918, 1917.
Yeah.
So early on.
All right. Let me see. Can you tell me, when did your connection with Heights Libraries begin?
Well, that's a story that has a picture in the archives also. When I was 17 years old, in 1967, the Shaker Heights Library had an 8mm film collection, and I was hired there as the page to take care of the collection. And they had the collection for about 6 months, and it was on approval, and they decided that it was not something they wanted to do because, why would anyone have films in a library?
Yeah.
In those days, that was unheard of. So they sent it back. It was on approval, and they sent it back. And shortly thereafter, Sarah Cody, who was the director here, had a meeting for Heights High students saying, what would you like to see in the library? Because the new library, Lee Road Library, was under construction and going to open in 1968. And she was curious as to what people would like to see. So I went to the meeting, and various people were there, and we gave our opinions. And after the meeting, I went up to her and I said, Miss Cody, and I told her my story about Shaker Heights. I said, I thought films did very well there, and if you would like to hire me as a page to take care of the films, I would be more than happy to work for you. So that was in the spring of 68. And I also ended up on the opening day committee for the library. So on September 8th, I believe it was, the new library opened, and that was my first day of work for the Cleveland Heights University Heights Public Library.
Wow.
So I've effectively been in the business for 50 years, and this year, 2018, it'll be 50 years since I first worked for the Cleveland Heights Library System.
Wow. So what did your job duties, like taking care of the film, what did you have to do?
People would take out the 8mm film, and they would show it, and then they would bring it back, and my job was to run the film between 2 arms, crank arms, and clean it with a little cloth and make sure there were no breaks or burns in it. If there were breaks or burns in it, I repaired them with the little repair kit that I had.
You repaired them?
Yeah.
Wow.
And seems to me we used to charge people like 10 cents for a burn. So, that was big money in those days.
Yeah.
And then they would be checked off their card when they were in good condition and put back out on the shelf.
Could they only get one at a time? How many do you think they were allowed
that
to
I
take
don't
out?
really remember. It wasn't
Yeah.
very many because the collection wasn't real big, so maybe one or two at the time at the beginning.
Yeah. How much did they pay you an hour back then? Do you remember?
Yes. I started working for the Cleveland Heights Library System for 75 cents an hour.
Was it a popular service?
Yes, very popular. I had been right to go to Miss Cody and say, this is something that would be good for the library to do. And really the way they did it, they kept adding to it. It started off with a lot of two-reel comedies, Charlie Chaplin, Laurel and Hardy, Buster Keaton. And then they started buying, once they saw it was a collection that people were enjoying, they started getting feature films like Nosferatu and, I can't think, Birth of a Nation, actually, and Broken Blossoms, which was another D.W. Griffith movie, Metropolis, Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, all the classic films that were a little bit longer, and people took those out. So it was interesting, and really was predated the interest that people had in borrowing films from the library, and eventually, we're where we are now with the whole AV room.
Yeah. What do you remember about the renovation? I mean, they went from, it was one floor, right? They added a second floor
Right.
in 67. It was like 67 and they reopened in 68.
Right. The children's room area, that's now the teen room area, is built is the shell of the original library that was here, the 1930s library. So they took down houses along Lee Road and along Delwood and Ormond, and they expanded all the way, from block to block, and the new building, was modern in 1968, and had meeting rooms on the second floor. To begin with, the collection was all down on the first floor.
Right.
But the children's room was to the north. The adult area, where the children's room is now, was just this huge open space, and people loved it. And we had a giant reference collection, and we had a giant magazine collection, and the fiction and the nonfiction. At the time, other than Cleveland Public Library, it was the largest suburban library in the state of Ohio. It really was cutting edge in lots of the things that we were doing here.
Was it controversial? I've seen some pictures of them tearing the houses down. Was that controversial in the community? Do you think people were on, was it,
I was a high school student, so, but I know that later on, when the library wanted to take some additional houses for additional parking, the neighbors said, no, that's not going to happen, and referenced back to when the houses were taken down for the parking lot. I remember that the two houses on Ormond, actually they allowed the people who were living in the houses to continue living in the houses until they were fairly old, and until they decided to move elsewhere. And at that point, they tore down those houses too, and expanded the parking lot.
So, after you were a page, how did you progress after that?
Well, I was a page. Some of them are jobs that no longer exist, but I was what was called a library aide.
Oh.
I was a library clerk. One summer I was a guard.
Oh, wow. Did you wear, I've seen pictures of the uniform they used to wear?
Right, no, that was after my time as a guard. I didn't have to wear that. Then I became a pre-professional, which now we refer to like a library associate. And then I went to library school and became a professional librarian here. So I worked my way up. I was here from 1968 to 1975. And did quite a variety of things in that time.
Did you do programming? What kind of do you have? I mean, do you have like a favorite memory? I guess I know it might be hard because you have such a long career.
Well, there were lots of things here that we did that were really a lot of fun. The summer reading programs were great. I remember one year, that the kids, once they had finished reading, they traced around their foot and they cut out a footprint and put their name on it, and they had footprints going from the front door into the children's room by the end of the summer. Now, in the middle of that, Godzilla's footprint showed up one night, and it said 108 books eaten. I can't imagine who would do such a thing, but it was things like that. It was in some ways a simple time in that, we didn't have a lot of, the technology wasn't here. It was all manual.
Right.
But it was also a real heyday because as librarians, we really had to know our reference collection. We had to be able to answer questions. We had to be able to think on our feet without Googling and without going to a database. When somebody wanted to reserve a book, it cost them, first it cost them a dime, eventually it cost them a quarter. And because there was no electronic catalog, the circulation clerks had a book of all these slips with people's names on them, and every day would go to the shelf and look and see if the book had come back. And when it had, then they would call them or send them a postcard saying that their book was in.
Yeah, I did read that there was a fee for that if you wanted to get a notification sent to your home.
Right.
By post, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
It was. I can't remember how much it was, and they raised it at one point.
Right. It seems to me it was originally 10 cents and went to 25 cents. And it seems to me people weren't happy about that, but the cost of postage had gone up, and the volume of books that we had was, and the number of requests we had was just incredible. Cleveland Heights, University Heights has always been a reading community. And people they wanted new books, they wanted history, they wanted crafts and how-tos, and and in those days we didn't have access to anyone else's collection.
Right.
And we didn't know what Cleveland Public had. We didn't know what the other, Shaker Heights had. So we were really very dependent on our own collection.
Right.
And so we did everything we could to get it to people when we could.
So how did you approach reference questions then without the internet?
Well, as I said, we really had to know our collection. And we had an in-depth reference collection. One of the people I worked with, the reference librarian when I first became an associate here, was Marcella Marteca. She became the head of the business library down at Cleveland Public Library eventually. Nancy Fisher took over the role as reference librarian. Both of them were great. I worked with great people here, leaders in the library field. I was very fortunate. Marcella Marteca, she made sure that we knew what was in every one of those reference books. there was an expectation that we would spend time with each of them. There was an expectation that if someone came to ask a question, we would say, "Oh, I think that would be found in," and we'd walk over to the book. And because we worked as a team on questions. There were always 2 or 3 people at the adult reference desk. So if one person, we'd listen in on each other's interactions. And if one person said, "Gee, let me think about that," someone else would say, "Well, you might want to try," and then they'd name a particular source that would be good.
Yeah.
As I said, I worked with great people here. Sarah Cody, Rachel Nelson, Nancy Wareham Nancy Wareham was my adult services supervisor. Rachel Nelson was the assistant director. Sarah Cody was the director. All 3 of them were leaders in librarianship in the state of Ohio. They were all president of OLC, I think, at one point or another. And it was a great learning opportunity. And they were very encouraging to me, which was nice also. They encouraged me when I decided to go into library science and supported me. Changed my schedule as needed so that I could take my classes, things like that. It's a great place to work.
So were they your inspiration for becoming a librarian, or did you already have that in you?
No, I always was a big reader, and as we all learn, reading and librarianship don't necessarily go hand in hand because you don't get to sit and read. But I was always a big reader, and my family used the library constantly. We would make weekly trips in the evening to the Noble Road branch. We would sometimes go to the Coventry Library. We'd sometimes go to University Heights. We'd sometimes come here to Lee Road. Noble, though, was the branch where we went most frequently, and as I say, it was on a weekly basis. We would always come out of there with 2 small handled shopping bags of books. One of them was my father, my brother, my sister, myself, and the other one was my mother, who was a voracious mystery reader and would literally go through a bag of books in a week. And then next week we'd go and we'd get another group. She also, back in the day, and this is, we're talking like late 50s, they had what they called 24-hour books.
Oh, really?
And it was 2 cents a day if you kept it overdue. And my mother would borrow it, take it home at night, read it, and take it back the next day.
Wow.
And so lots of the brand new books, were handled that way.
And they were only 24 hours?
Yeah. And the 2 cents a day, basically, if you wanted to keep them a week, it cost a dime. But my mom was a speedy reader.
Yeah, books back then were a lot less expensive, too. I mean, would that be... I wonder how comparable the 10 cents a week would be to the cost of a paperback back then, or would they be new hardbacks?
It was the cost of a paperback back then, and hardcovers were $2 to $3. I mean, add a 0 behind everything, and you got today's prices.
Right.
Although, when I opened up Apple Tree Books, someone once told me that the cost of a cheap seat in the theater, the cost of a dinner with a glass of wine, and the cost of a hardback book had all been the same, in sync with each other since Shakespeare's time.
Oh, wow.
So, in Shakespeare's day, it was a penny for the cheap seats, or for standing room in the pit. It was a penny for dinner, and books cost a penny as well. And it has only gone up since then.
Do you remember thinking about the 70s. Just thinking about like library services in general. I mean, do you think how do you think technology has really changed libraries?
Well, it's been huge. I left librarianship in 1975 to go work, to open up Apple Tree Books and work there. I had it till 1990, at which point I sold it and got back into libraries. And I said at the time that all the things we said we wished we could do, we could then do in 1990. So that 15 years then was a huge, huge change for technology. When I was a librarian here, I was in charge of the magazines. And every year, one of the secretaries would type up the magazine list of the magazine holdings on a typewriter. And in library school, I had learned how to do a little bit of basic computer programming. And I suggested that if we did a set of punch cards, we could run the list down at the Chi Corporation, which was down at the foot of Cedar Hill, a huge computer center, with computers the size of a room. We could run the list down there, and then, all we had to do was, at any given time, pull out a punch card, re-punch it, put the new one in, and, it was a lot easier. Well, it cost $25 to become a member of Chi Corporation. And Sarah Cody invited me, asked me, told me to come to the board and explain the project to them so that they would approve the $25 expense to join the Chi Corporation. Well, they did, and that was the first computerization of any of the collection. When I was here too, we had a teletype that connected all of the libraries that became CleveNet libraries. And I learned how to run the teletype machine. I was the backup teletype operator. And during the day, we'd take requests, and if we didn't own the book, we'd put it on the teletype, and everybody would scramble around to find the books on the list, and the first person who found them would teletype that they had them, and then, if you weren't fast, you didn't get to loan the book. And then we would send them through delivery to whatever the library system was. And during the day, if the bell rang 3 times, that meant it was a rush order. And we'd go to the machine, you'd look, you'd see what the title was, you'd race out onto the floor, grab a copy of the book, race back, and hope that you got there before the person from Shaker or the person from Euclid or from Everett.
So you were all kind of competing then?
Yes. It was fun. It was great.
Around what year was that, do you think?
Well, I got my library degree in 73, so it had to be somewhere between 70 and 73. Because I was already in the working in the office and working as a pre-professional, so somewhere in there.
Yeah, I've read about some of the computerized systems that they started getting in the early 80s and how revolutionary those were.
Oh, absolutely. One of the projects, date due slips, used to be a hand project, and with cards, and they'd file the cards in circulation, and then they'd pull the cards back out and put them in the books, and the whole process. And at some point, they got these machines that microfilmed a transaction, and they would put down a slip of paper with a machine-readable number on it that looked a lot like a check, and they put the person's library card, and they would put the book, and they would click the button and take a microfilm picture of it, or became microfilm, a picture of it, and then when the books were returned, the slips were sent to Cleveland Trust.
Oh.
Because they were indeed checks. And Cleveland Trust would run the list of what had been returned and what had been taken out, and it was taken off people's records. But that was a real innovation, and we were one of the first libraries to do that.
Yeah, it seems like Heights libraries were on the forefront. I mean, of some of these computerized systems, it seems like we were on the forefront of getting a lot of these, systems in place.
Absolutely, and again, Sarah Cody, Rachel Nelson, Steve Wood, who was a good friend. They really, it was like they could see the future. They could see where libraries were going, and they took what steps were needed over the course of 25, 30 years to get the library system to that point. It really, very forward-thinking directors and a great staff that would just run away with the projects. Somebody would come up with an idea and boom, it was implemented.
Yeah. So where do you think in the future? I mean, that's a big question, but where do you think libraries are headed? I mean, you have a lot of perspective, working in this field.
Well, I'm bullish on libraries. For about 5-6 years, I taught at Kent State, and one of the things that the students at Kent State would ask me is, am I going to have a career? Is this a master's degree worth getting? And I always said yes, because libraries have always seen how to use the new technology in order to provide the kinds of services that they are known for.
Right.
So, if you want information, if you want entertainment, if you want, I don't know, other things. Story times for your kids. If you want teenage programs, all those things. If you want community meeting rooms, all those things that libraries have been doing, there's still a demand in the community. Plus, you and I learn things every day. And people come in and they sit down at the computer, for instance, and they need to do a Word document. And they're having trouble with it, and they come up and they get one of us and they say, here's what I'm having trouble with. And what do? We go and we say, okay, click here, click here, click here. You're all set. And they say, okay, what did you do? I said, click here, click here, click here. And they say, oh, thank you so much. How do you know how to do that? Well, I got to tell you, I was not born knowing how to do that. But in fact, we all learn. And we have had enough questions and worked enough ourselves that we're able to really help our customers. And our customers still see that. Customers still come in and say, what have you read recently? I like a good book. Because we keep up on that. What's the name of the new Dan Brown? I really enjoyed his other ones, and I'd like to read this one too. I've read all of pick an author, and who else writes like them. So those kinds of questions haven't changed. Those are the exact same questions we always had. It's where we go to look up that information. And we used to have book lists, printed book lists that we could refer to, and now we can go onto Goodreads and get a real nice list of similar titles, read-alikes. So what we've done is we're using the technology to enhance the services that we have always provided, and then we think of new services that we can provide, and I don't see libraries going away because there are always people who will need help, who will need entertainment, who will need the camaraderie of libraries. I mean, think about how many of our customers we see here every day, every single day. They're nice people. They live in the neighborhood. Lots of them are retirees, but many of them are here working because they work from home, but they really work from the library. And they have made a community, and they've made a community with us. And you know, it's really the use of libraries hasn't gone down. If anything, it's gone up as we've offered more and more levels of service and identified groups of people who might not have thought to come into a library in the 60s because it was a little more genteel than it is now.
Right.
But you know, we've welcomed them in. We always have welcomed people. And Heights Library certainly has always welcomed people. And you know, it's been a great opportunity to work here. And you know, I'm very fortunate that I was here at the beginning of this building in '68 through '73. I was involved with the Friends of the Library between '75 and whatever 20 years ago was. And then almost 7 years ago I came back here as a part-time librarian. And I love being a librarian, I really do. It's a real people-oriented job. I feel we're doing important work. We have lots of satisfied customers, and I think the library will be around for those very reasons. It's a good place to be.
Yeah. Are there any other large-scale changes other than technology that you can...
Well, the building has changed because we've opened up the entire second floor and built out on it. There was an interim time when they originally just the meeting rooms and the staff room and the offices were up here on the second floor, and then they created an area and moved the fiction up into it, and then in this latest rebuilding, they completely reconfigured the entire building. So those are big changes because it's allowed the library to expand collections. Every time when they moved the fiction upstairs, they were able to expand the fiction collection. And now the adult department, being up here, and the children's room being where the adult department was, so it's 3 times the size, and the teen room, which originally was a little square in the browsing room.
Yeah, it was just some shelves.
Right, in the browsing room, and now there's a whole teen room, and again we welcome the teens in, which means that during the years where they were most likely to not come to the library because it wasn't a cool place to be, now they're coming to the library, which means that they will continue coming to the library. This generation, we're going to really have had them from baby and me story times all the way into being adults.
Right.
And that's just real exciting.
Yeah, and we purchased that renovation, we purchased the old YMCA across the street, and we're able to build the technology lab over there.
Yes, and expand that as well into where the old gym is in there, and that's something too. Community partnerships. We have the Bama Theater in the basement over there. We have the Small Business Administration office on the second floor, and we encourage entrepreneurs to come and get help from the SBA and have a workspace for them. We have the gallery, and we're showing local artists in a really nice way. There's a daycare, so we've partnered with lots of different organizations to make the library more like one-stop shopping. You can come to the library and you can be an entrepreneur and you can work on some computer things, and then you can go get a good book and a movie and go home at night and relax. It's pretty great.
Yeah, and you were at University Heights, right, as well, when they did a renovation?
I was not. I moved.
Oh, you helped.
I helped move books around at Coventry and at University Heights, and it was more of a shifting of collections and trying to make the most of spaces that were. So I was a page and a young librarian when those things happened. Although at the University Heights one, I was a librarian by then, and I was put in charge of the move. So that was one of my first professional. And I'd done it as a page. I'd been the person who pulled the things off the shelf. But I had to organize it at University Heights.
So how do you think Cleveland Heights and University Heights, like as a city, have changed over time? Have you noticed any changes?
Well, I'll say yes and no. The color, the ethnicity, what countries people are from are different now than they were when I was growing up in this community.
Yeah.
The people aren't any different. Because people are people. And Cleveland Heights has always attracted people moving out of the city of Cleveland, people coming from other countries. When my grandparents built the house on Redwood, they had come here from Lithuania, and they had lived in Cleveland, and then they'd moved out a little bit from down. They were on Orange Street, which is where near where the Q is. That they moved out, and then they built a house on the Heights, and they were lovely people, and they had thick accents. And now we have other lovely people who come in and have thick accents. Who have moved along, and whose children have gone through Heights and have gone to college now, and and are doctors and lawyers, and the whole thing. We see it happening over and over and over, and. As I say, the racial makeup has changed, but the kinds of people we have and the kinds of services they ask for, other than the technology, haven't really changed. And that's part of the excitement to me of living in these communities, is you get a very copacetic group of people who want to be here. And who appreciate the services that the communities provide, and we're one of those services. I can't tell you how many times people, here say, "Thank you so much. I really appreciate you. I love coming to the library because fill in the blank." And that makes it worthwhile going home in the evening, a little bit tired, but knowing that we've made some differences in people's lives, and we've helped a lot of people in the course of the day.
Yeah, I've looked at a lot of the program offerings in the 70s and the 80s, and a lot of the programs are very international in perspective.
Yeah, and that was because that was a time when. We had a lot of people coming here from Eastern Europe, a lot of Russians coming to the community. And the library has always been a melting pot, really. When they talk about the American melting pot, the library has been in the center of that. English as a second language classes. Go to Ellis Island, and there's a sign in Ellis Island promoting English as a second language and citizenship classes at Cleveland Public Library, and it's written in like 10 different languages. Cleveland has always, been a melting pot, but the library is the place that everybody can really come together. Rich, poor, young, old, everybody is in here. You don't have to have money to come to the library.
Yeah.
You can be, anywhere on the learning curve, and we appreciate you showing up. And we'll help you as best we can to get what you need. That's the way we've always done it.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if are there any other fond memories you have that you...
Well, it's
I feel like there's probably a lot of them.
Right, and it's the people. The people I worked with then, the people I work here now. Even since I came back here, lots of our staff have gone on to work elsewhere, who have become library directors in other communities. The networking that happens really is just fabulous. But I think I think back, to my early days here, and it was supportive. We had some fun. I had one time on March 31st, I stayed over after the library was closed. We used to have browsing bins with things like mystery or whatever on them. And I had made all sorts of different signs, and I took down the originals and I put the signs up. And they said things like, "These fell on the floor. Books with red covers. We never read these either. Books that are too tall for the shelves." And the next day, first of all, the staff came in before the library opened, and they were hysterical. And then the customers came in, and they were hysterical. And we left those bins up for the entire month of April. It was just like an April Fool's the entire month. It was just, there were fun things like that happened. And, it was one time, as a practical joke, there were a group of us young ones on one evening, and we hid the Oxford English Dictionary, all 36 volumes of it.
Oh, wow.
And then the next morning when one of the librarians came in, she said, "What happened to the Oxford English Dictionary? What happened to the OED?" And we looked and we said, "Oh my goodness, it's gone. Someone must have taken it." Well, eventually, we fessed up and put it back. But it was, the camaraderie was really fun. And
well, a lot of innovation is supposed to come from playful, the playful attitude.
Right.
And I think Heights Libraries has always been a place that's incredibly innovative.
Absolutely. The book bike idea that we have here that goes out in the summer to various places in the community. When the University Heights Library was closed for renovation, and we ran that bookmobile through University Heights. I mean, these are all the kinds of things that, we've got a lot of stuff in the box, but we keep thinking outside the box. And again, that's Cleveland Heights.
Yeah.
It's a whole group of people who think outside the box. A whole group of rugged individualists who have gotten together to form a community. And it's always been encouraged. And the directors here have always been willing to try something new. And if it works, terrific. And if for some reason it doesn't work out the way they think it's going to, they're willing to fiddle with it. And if it's really just a dud, they say, "Oh, well, it didn't work," and they move on to the next thing. And that, I think, is one of the reasons we have such a good staff, is that everybody thinks, okay, well, I can come up with a wild idea, and they'll support me in it, because if it works, then I've done something additional for the community.
Do you have any of those Did you have any wild ideas that you feel like really benefited the community? I mean, here or in your other professions?
Well, I can't say I had any big ones. But, for instance, one of my ideas was digitizing on microfilm the Sun newspapers. And I was in charge of that project, and we worked with the University Microfilms on that. And the newspapers, by the time I got to them, they were from the 20s and the 30s, and they were on newsprint. Some of them were earlier than that, and they were, falling apart.
Probably degrading.
Yeah, absolutely. They were bound in these huge volumes that were on the shelf, special shelving for them. And my idea to get them photocopied on microfilm was something that the Friends of the Library supported, and University Microfilm supported, and we shipped everything off to them, and they did it, and because by today we still use those microfilms.
Oh yeah, very heavily.
Very heavily, and people really want to know, and I'd love it if we went to the next step and somehow we're able to digitalize them to online.
Oh yeah, and then share them with the community.
Really share them outside of the building. But the fact of the matter is, 40 years later, those papers would have been dust,
right,
and unreadable, and we would have lost them, and that was a big part of the community. One of my projects as a young librarian was filling in the holes in the city directories, and now we have a full set of the Cleveland city directories from 1920 something all the way through, and I went to various other libraries that had duplicates, and we picked things up here and there, and we filled in. That was how we were able to handle things way back when. I'm very proud of the fact that Apple Tree Books is now 42 years old, and on its third owner, and is a major part of the Cedar Fairmount community and the Cleveland Heights. Starting that store and seeing it continue on is really great as far as I'm concerned. And as I said earlier, coming back here, coming back into libraries after Apple Tree, and then coming back here to the Heights Library at this end of my career, it's been very gratifying because it's a good community to work in, and it's an appreciative community, and as I said earlier, I really think we're making a difference here, and that's what's important at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, and I think it shows, when the community comes out to support us, when we have a levy or...
Right.
I didn't know if you were involved in any of the
actually,
levy campaigns.
I was. So I have a couple levy stories. Sarah Cody, when I was hired, she called me into her office and offered me the job as a librarian. And she said to me, "Now, Mr. Rubin, we're putting our first levy on the ballot." This is in 1973. We're putting our first levy on the ballot. And last hired, first fired.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's comforting.
Yeah, right. You could tell that she was Buffalo Bill's niece when she did things like that. So I said, "Miss Cody, I will help support and promote this levy, because not only for myself, but also for the library. But I appreciate what you've told me." Well, years later, I became the treasurer for the Heights Library Levy Committee, and I did that for many years. In those days, we had to go back to the community every 5 years for additional money, or to renew our levy and for additional money. And I think I worked with Steve Wood on 2 or 3 of those campaigns.
Yeah, those were the early 2000s, right?
Right, yeah, yeah. As I said, I was on the Friends of the Library board a couple different times. I was on the board when I was a page here early on, and the opening day committee, as I said. And then after I had Apple Tree Books, I was also on the Friends of the Library board here, and I was the treasurer for that as well. So there's I've always had some sort of contact with the Heights libraries, and seen them from a variety of different perspectives. It's been interesting.
Are there any other things you think we should know about
Well,
how library services have evolved, or?
Yeah, I'm feeling pretty talked out at this point.
Yeah.
But it's been a good 50 years. I can see this continuing. I certainly see a continuation in this community where people are so supportive. When these levies have been on the ballot, they have been passed by such margins that people say, wait a minute, that can't be possible. In other communities, they say, wait a minute, you couldn't really do it by that percentage. Yes, we can, because this community understands the value of this library system, and is willing to financially support it to keep it going, which is just wonderful.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you. This was a fun opportunity.
Yeah. Wonderful. Okay. All righty.
All right. Thanks.
Thanks.